Welcome to Booked, where two true gentlemen doth vigorously discuss the literature which they voraciously consume. I am Livius Snowden.
And I'm I'm Rob Olson. The reason that Livius may be talking like that is because the book that we're going to be talking about in this episode is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas.
I've only been able to talk that way for like 3 days now. It gets really awkward in public.
You're like either challenging people to duels or like professing your love or
Yeah.
saying
Exactly.
Purdue or whatever they kept saying. Anyway, Pardue.
Apropos.
Yeah, apropos all the time. Apropos. Here's a quick bio of Alexandre Dumas that we pulled. I just pulled like the first paragraph off of Wikipedia because there doesn't seem to be an actual normal bio on Amazon, and I think that's just because, you know, the dude was writing hundreds and hundreds of years ago or something. But anyway, here we go. Alexandre Dumas was a French writer. His works have been translated into many languages, and he is one of the most widely read French authors. Many of his historical novels of high adventure were originally published as serials, including The Count of Monte Cristo, The Three Musketeers, 20 years after, and The Vicomte de Bragelonne, 10 years later. His novel
There's going to be a lot of that this episode.
There's going to be a lot of that. His novels have been adapted since the early 20th century for nearly 200 films. That's really poorly written. Wikipedia. Dumas's last novel, The Night of Saint Hermione? Maybe
Sure.
It's one of those Harry Potter novels. Unfinished at his death, was completed by scholar Claude Chappe and published in 2005. It was published in English in 2008 as The Last Cavalier. I did not know that.
There's probably a lot of things we didn't know about this book and or Alexandre Dumas. Here's a synopsis in the event that you have never seen. I'm guessing the most popular version is that fucking Disney one.
The 90s.
That's got like Kiefer Sutherland. Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah, so in case you haven't seen that, yeah. Perhaps the greatest cloak and sword story ever written, The Three Musketeers, was published in 1844, is a tale for all time. Pitting the heroic young D'Artagnan and his noble compatriots Athos, Porthos, and Aramis against the master of intrigue Cardinal Richelieu and the quintessential wicked woman Lady de Winter, Alexandre Dumas has created an enchanted France of swordplay, schemes, and I know this says assignations. Assignations, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be. The era and the characters are based on historical fact, but the glittering romance and fast-paced action spring from a great writer's incomparable imagination. From the perilous retrieval of the Queen's gift to her lover in time to foil Richelieu's plot to the dramatic revelation of Lady de Winter's true identity, The Three Musketeers is the unchallenged archetype of literary romance and a perennial delight for generations of readers.
All right, an assignation is an appointment to meet someone in secret, typically one made by lovers.
Yeah, so that happened a lot in this book.
Lots of assignations. I need to
Lots
have an
of
assignation.
Dude, just listen. Here's your ticket out of your financial situation. Okay, you create an app. And it's called Assignations, and see how well that does. That can be a top competitor to Plenty of Fish and
Tinder.
Tinder, that's the one I was thinking of. Grindr, that's another one, right?
That's the gay one.
Yeah, there's probably a lot more secret assignations in that one than there is in what's the religious one?
Christian Mingle.
That's it, Christian Mingle. Yeah. So
I've never.
Yeah, all right,
never
whatever.
used Christian Mingle. Typically, don't want to mingle with Christians.
Oh,
at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, but where to start, right? So, why are we doing this? This is a throwback episode. We didn't really mention that. It's our farthest throwback ever. So, from time to time, we want to read something we missed along the way, something that came out before this podcast. And 1844. By my recollection, is just a little bit before we started the podcast, so it qualifies as a throwback.
Yeah, there was no way we were really getting this one like when it first released, and it was probably a serial, so that would have kind of throwing us off anyway, I think.
Very true. Yep.
Yeah.
The synopsis is interesting in that it basically assumes that you're very familiar with the story, right? Yeah. So from a synopsis standpoint, I think it does justice, because really, who isn't at least somewhat familiar with the story of the Three Musketeers? What I will say is I have three issues with the title of the book. So let's start there. First of all, for guys that were musketeers, that would lead me to believe they carried muskets, right?
I mean, that's what I guessed, but obviously not. Because it takes place in like the 1600s, right? Were there muskets then?
I believe so.
All right.
Let's see. History of the musket. I guess my challenge to it is there were almost no muskets.
There was a lot of sword play, a lot more swords than guns.
Yeah. And that's what they're known for. When you say to somebody the Three Musketeers, the first thing they're picturing is a feather in a hat and a saber of some sort, right?
So I guess my question, this is going to be a testament to our preparedness. That's not Dumas's fault as much as whoever like named Musketeers, like in French history, right?
I mean, I guess the question is, were Musketeers carrying around more muskets than he?
I'm on the Musketeer article on Wikipedia.
Okay.
Was a type of soldier equipped with a musket. The Musketeers were an important part of early modern armies, particularly in Europe, as they normally comprised the majority of their infantry. The musketeer was a precursor to the rifleman. Muskets were replaced by rifles in most Western armies during the mid-1850s. So, as far as history goes, musketeers did have muskets. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't seem like they were very important to the King's Guard type musketeers that we were reading about.
That's a good point, yeah. Yeah. I mean, a musket is a longer range weapon, right? So, this is my first issue. Can I move on to my second one?
Yeah, please.
The book is called The Three Musketeers. Although, who would you define as the protagonist of this book?
D'Artagnan.
Who spends the whole fucking book trying to be a musketeer. So either you could have called it The Four Musketeers, which I believe has happened in movies, which makes more sense, right? But my third and final challenge to it is, in the book, very early in the book, they are referred to as the Three Inseparables, that being Athos, Porthos, and Aramis.
Yeah.
And I think the Three Inseparables is an even better title than the Three Musketeers.
All valid points. Things that I kind of tumbled around in my head, because at some points during the book, they were referred to as the Four Musketeers as well. That did happen. Yeah,
well, I mean, he does finally get... Look, this is going to be filled with spoilers, because the book is 250 fucking years old. And like I said, who hasn't seen a movie? And most recently, the BBC did a serial adaptation, which I only watched a couple episodes of, but I might revisit at some point, because I think they actually went into a second series for it. He does become a musketeer, and then it is fair that it's the Four Musketeers.
Well, I mean, if you watch that Disney movie...
Was that called The Four Musketeers?
No, I'm just saying.
Oh, I guess. Yeah, I see what you're saying. He gets his commission at that too. Yeah. So there you go. Did I spend enough time on the title?
You was there? Did we set an amount of time? No.
I have no idea.
You're just avoiding trying to explain this fucking story, is what you're doing.
Well, what happened is I don't know. I may have thought more during reading this book than I have during any other book I've read.
Like, thought about the plot, or pondered things, or like tried to decipher?
I shared with you off the air, but I'll say it here. This is I use the Kindle dictionary app where you look up words.
Yeah. More
in this book easily than probably in any other 4 or 5 books I've ever read total. I'm sure I looked up 70 words.
Wow.
In this book, and I found, some really interesting words. I don't have notes on them and stuff, so it's a little like assignations that we looked up from the synopsis. It was like that throughout the whole book.
You know what? That reminds me. I was looking at because I was reading it on the Kindle app as well on my iPad, and you know how like you can mark stuff like highlight things and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was, and I don't remember how I found it, but like you said you read it on the Kindle, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Does yours have like the like commonly highlighted passages thing going on?
So it's weird because it does. The only one I found was like at the very last chapter, like before the epilogue or whatever. There was one that was highlighted 535 times.
Yeah, like there's one I just randomly found. But anyway, I can't remember what it was, but like I was looking at something where it said how many different passages in the book had been highlighted and by how many people. There's something, and I can't find it now, but I'll agree. I did do a lot of like quick lookups of words. And I really wish I remember. I was gonna like write it down. There was a word that had no definition. Like it just like wasn't. I couldn't find a definition for it at all. Like in the app or outside of it. It was so. I don't know if it was like a made up word or just. I don't know.
I seem to remember a word that I couldn't get the definition. I did go like outside the app to do it. I do know that a lot of this, a lot of them, I don't know if you know, used. Oh, what was the term they used? Where really it's like an old ass word.
What do you mean?
Like where you looked up the definition, and I wish I could remember what it was, but the indication was that it was a word that's no longer in usage. So they were giving you a very old definition of a word, and But the interesting thing is this has been translated numerous times. I'm pretty sure you and I read the same version. So let me start there. Yeah. Had we have read a different version, there might have been significantly less or significantly more words. So depending on how scholarly and how wordy the person is who translated it, it really depends on what you're going to get as far as a reading experience goes.
Yeah, because I imagine in translation, like that word that had no definition could have been like slang for the time that just did not have an English like equivalent, and they just left it as like a kind of the same way they did with names of buildings or roads or stuff. They left it in the French, or like titles of people. They might have just left it as like an untranslatable word or something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing too was when they were talking to the German, the military guys. Mm-hmm. I didn't even try because you could tell some of those words were kind of cobbled from German. Yeah, and I don't feel that the Kindle app would have any definition for that.
Right. So there were hurdles. Since we're talking about the language, did you have any trouble? Like, I know that sometimes when there's I can't think of the book that I know we've had this in the past where like keeping characters separate was a difficult thing because all of the names were foreign. I think I have a problem with that in like fantasy or sci-fi stories where everything's just fucking made up and you can't keep everything apart. But sometimes with translations, I have a little bit of trouble. But for some reason with this one, I had very good ideas of who all the characters were.
Yeah, I didn't struggle with that at all. The plot is very, very complicated, though. And at times it was hard to keep track of not the who's who, but how they relate to the plot, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Then there were times where I was like, oh, I kind of was under the impression that this person wasn't an ally of this other person. But now I think they are, but I'm not really sure. Like I did have that happening a number of times.
I mean, that could be attributed to once we start talking about plot, like I have a thought about the flights of fancy that we experienced throughout. So maybe
yeah.
we might get into that. So I don't know. Let's slap a little plot on our listeners for people who are completely unaware of what the Three Musketeers is about.
So we start off the book with a young D'Artagnan who is going to leave his home, make his way to Paris, where he is hoping to gain a position in the Musketeers. He has this hope because the captain of the Musketeers, Monsieur de Treville, is the former neighbor of his, someone who lived in his town who his father served in the military with. So his father writes him a letter of recommendation that the bond of their military service will gain his son some favor, which it probably should. But on his way there, he encounters a situation in which he is robbed of his letter. So he stumbles across a man who's meeting with a woman, and him and the man exchange words, and D'Artagnan, winds up getting hurt, and he's in this, I don't know, a hotel seems to be the wrong, like an inn, and his letter is stolen. So he continues on and makes his way to Paris, requests an audience with Monsieur de Treville, and he explains what happened, and Treville is understanding, but is unable to give him a position in the Musketeers, but will definitely try to do something for him. Upon leaving, it turns into this weird like comedy of errors where he did briefly meet the three Musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who are established and are favorites of the captain of the Musketeers. But when he's leaving, he manages to somehow encounter and offend all three of them, so that he is challenged to duels 1 hour apart with each of the three Musketeers.
Yeah. Which, if we're going to dip over into that Disney movie, is probably, that's kind of like how the characters are introduced in the movie. Chris O'Donnell is this cocky little kid. Anyway, like when that happened in the book, I totally just pictured Chris O'Donnell talking to like Oliver Platt and Charlie Sheen and fucking Kiefer Sutherland.
But that's the goddamn shame of it, right? Is that you talk about this book, which is, it's a legendary piece of literature. I mean, there's no other word for it, right? But then you conflate it with goddamn Disney's watered down version, and you've got would you say his name? Oliver Platt, right? Is that him? God damn it! You know what? He did fine in that movie, but that movie is like loosely based on a great literary novel is the best way that I can put it. So anybody who's thinking like, I'm going to read this book, I'm going to get the novelization of that movie, is sorely mistaken.
No, yeah, and what I feel is, if we're talking about the movie, they took a handful of the best plot points and a general impression of the characters, and just kind of made their own thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we could talk more about that throughout the course of this. The other thing they do, I think that... So I read this when I was in high school. So I have some recollection of reading it 30 years ago. The thing about the Disney movie, and possibly other adaptations to it, I remember seeing the first that BBC series, is that they probably gave the Three Musketeers more personality than comes across in this book.
I could see,
like exaggerated,
like caricatures of
their
of
characters.
The
Yes,
characters. Yeah.
Yes, yep,
For sure. So after the duels, so they show up for the duels, and their dueling is interrupted by the what are the troops of the Cardinal called?
I think they're just called the Cardinals Guard.
Cardinals Guard. Yeah, and so then it's that scene like in the movie where it's like, oh, there's 7 of them and 3 of us, and then D'Artagnan's like, no, there's 4 of us, and they're like, you don't, and then the guard's like, this kid doesn't matter to us, we only care about the Musketeers, and then there's a whole big fight, and so that was interesting to see, because like it's kind of a weird thing how duels and battles happen in this book, and obviously it's a sign of the time they were in, but like they're really casual about killing each other, but at the same time, like, it was more about defeating someone than them actually dying, which was interesting to read. And what I mean by that is, like, me and Livius are both like throwing down with swords, right? He stabs me in the thigh. The fight's over. And then he's like helping me up off the ground and like helping me get back on my horse or some shit. But if he stabs me like through the heart and I die, it's all part of fighting. So that was a really weird like thing to read, because it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it's all about who bested someone, not necessarily what the outcome of the fight is.
Yeah, and historically, so I had a couple of thoughts. This was written by Alexandre Dumas, based on history, which we'll talk about a little later too. But it was done 200 years after the fact.
Yeah.
So a lot of that had to be like some stuff he read, and the impression that he had of what the time was. Much like when we write stories now about the 1800s, a lot of that's a guess at what people's actual perceptions were, because you could base it on the little bit of reading that you did from the time. It'll be interesting because 200 years from now, people will be looking at like a Facebook archive and trying to suss out what 2019 is like.
Oh, Jesus.
And but
writing a book
think
about
this for a
podcasters.
second. Yeah, but think about this for a second. Think about how wrong they'll really get it.
Oh, yeah.
If you go through your Facebook feed and look at the exaggeration and the things that people post, but now you take them very, very seriously because you're a historian. And maybe you don't read the innuendo, or you don't read the comedy in it, and you go, man, these people are really fucking weird. So now I'm going to write a story, and that story maybe doesn't reflect everyday 2019 life because you're basing it not on your own personal experience being in the world, but reading somebody else's estimation of what that time period was.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the other thing I think was that there's a lot in this book about being a gentleman, right? I think that you don't want to stab somebody who's already down, who can't defend themselves. And I think maybe that's why.
Dishonorable.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I've got you knocked down and you can't walk because I stuck you in the thigh, then it would be really shitty for me to stand over you and stab you in the face 8 times with my sword. That wouldn't be gentlemanly.
Right. But if I pulled out a gun and aimed it at you, you could cut me up.
Yep, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Sense.
So after, as Rob mentioned, the Musketeers unite with D'Artagnan, and they take him under their wing because of his bravery, and they go back to Treville, who, as captain of the Musketeers, is forever at odds with the Cardinals Guard. So he's very secretly very, very happy that his people were able to defeat the Cardinals people. So D'Artagnan again enhances the favor of Treville by being just a kid essentially and standing up to these guys. And he also winds up killing and or wounding one of like their top guys too. So to top it all off, he has bested one of the best of the Cardinals guards.
Yeah, and it's around that time that he gets the job as a guardsman, which is different than a musketeer, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so now he
belongs to a different company.
I hope it's okay that I just keep kind of peppering thoughts into our discussion of the plot, because like there are things that confound me about the time. So
okay,
the guardsmen, musketeers, didn't it kind of seem like they weren't getting paid to be musketeers or like a guardsman?
So
like they had to kind of scratch
any mention. Yeah. They're broke a lot, and nobody's ever like, I can't wait till Friday so we can go back and drink more wine, which is what we would say today, right? You'd be like, oh, hey, I get paid day after tomorrow, let's go do something. No, not so much in this book. So I don't know if military service well, it wasn't mandatory, right? Because not everybody belonged to one of those groups. You had people who had regular jobs, they're innkeepers or they're jewelers or whatever. So yeah, I'm not really sure because they weren't.
Like my impression is that it bestowed social status as opposed to like a paycheck. That's the best that I could estimate, because these fucking guys were out hustling all the time. Like they were doing whatever they could to like scratch up some money. And as we'll eventually maybe talk about when war starts to brew, they get kind of like called to duty. Like, hey, 2 weeks from now, you got to show up at this place. Make sure you buy all your equipment. And it's like, what? You're the army. Like, yeah. So it was really strange that they did it was, you can't call it their job. It was more of a status that they, and a service kind of.
Well, and interestingly, bringing your own stuff, there was like a crazy, I don't even know, like it was very important to them that they had really nice stuff, not good stuff. it wasn't I'm going to get the most durable boots. It's I had to have like the nicest cloak.
Yeah,
and even like the saddle for my horse has to be of a certain caliber. I don't know. It would be interesting to get another take at what the Musketeers were like. Maybe not a fictional one, but to maybe read a couple paragraphs and see if any of this is reflective of Musketeers of the time.
Yeah, they were really focused on one of my favorite phrases in the book was horse furniture.
Yep.
Because in my mind, it's like, that's where the horses sit when they're...
Yeah.
Anyway, so one of the more entertaining things, and this is like, we haven't really talked about the tone of the story much. It kind of oscillates, I'd say, from like serious to very carefree, and this isn't necessarily the best example, but like when the Musketeers aren't out musketeering, like they go play tennis one day, and you'd never see that. That's never making it into one of the movie adaptations, like the Musketeers playing tennis, but it happens, and it's fucking great because D'Artagnan is like, I'll play tennis. He's never played it before. He doesn't know anything about the game. Almost gets fucking hit in the head with a tennis ball, and he's like, I'm out. And while the other Musketeers are playing tennis, he gets challenged to a duel again by another one of the Cardinals guards, who's another one of the high profile, kind of heroes of the Cardinals guard. And does he kill that one?
No, that one,
seriously
he
wounds
him. But yep. Because the Cardinal makes a big stink about it, but the guy winds up being okay after a while, like he didn't die. And but what you were saying about it oscillating, it's very true. And I said it's kind of like a comedy of errors, right? So there are many parts in this book. Two things: there are many parts in this book where it's all done kind of like a joke. Like if you're saying, I can't think of one, but Rob walks into a bar and there's a priest, a rabbi, and another clergyman from another race, right? Or another religion, another sect, whatever. It was like that a lot because D'Artagnan meets each of the three Musketeers individually and is caused to duel with all three of them. And there are plenty of times in the book where they're like, D'Artagnan went to Athos's house. Yep. And Athos wasn't there, so he went to Aramis's house. I mean, there's a lot of individual scenes. So in a way, it's almost like a comedy of errors. But this is probably one of the most intricate plots I've read in a book.
Yeah.
So it goes from them playing tennis or the silly, he bumps into one, he points out a dropped handkerchief to the other one and duels, and you go, all right, well, this is going to be kind of silly. But then you get into some real political intrigue. And it completely changes its tone and gets very somber and very serious. And towards the end of this book, it gets downright sad and jarring even at parts. Again, I said spoilers, but you know what I'm talking about, right? They find the original executioner, who had sentenced De Winter to death.
Yep,
like that's some heavy shit in that 20 pages.
Yeah, some real badass stuff, but also very heavy stuff. Yes, I agree. And so it's got kind of different gears, I feel. One is the funny gear, which happens a lot in I'd say the first half of the book. There's a lot of lighthearted stuff that establishes the character of the Musketeers, and I would say that irreverent is probably a good word, right? Would you say irreverent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're just kind of like, until there's something that needs to be taken seriously, they just are kind of, fun, like frat boys. It is kind of the feeling I get from these guys, but in a way where they care about, like you said before, being gentlemen, like a code of conduct and stuff like that. But they also are a little bit of troublemakers.
They care deeply about one another. There's kind of like this, I don't even know, maybe it's spoken, but I was going to say an unspoken, like if one has money, they all have money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like D'Artagnan comes into some money, and for 3 weeks he buys dinner every night and wine, and it's smart because they treat other people so that when they're broke, they can be invited to dinner and dining with somebody else. Yeah. Just fucking genius.
That was one of the funny parts too, because like when one of the moments when they're dead broke, it's up to each of them to find a dinner to get them all invited to and stuff, and then D'Artagnan feels bad because he doesn't get them as much, like, dinner time as the others have and stuff. So yeah, they really look out for each other.
Moving into the broader plot of the book is a weird love story / war over a woman, I guess is the best way I can put it. So in short, Queen Anne of Austria is Queen Anne, who's originally Anne of Austria, is married to Louis the 13th, but she is in love with the Duke of Buckingham. So she is married to the French king, but has fallen in love from her one interaction one night at a party with the Duke of Buckingham, who's a duke who commands the military, basically, of England. And through some things that happen, the Duke of Buckingham decides essentially to declare war on France over this woman. So throughout the plot, what we're seeing is Cardinal Richelieu, who's really seems to be the one who's in command of the military and not so much the king. His spies and his plots to make things happen, and how the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan specifically gets caught up in all of this. He falls in love with a girl who he's seen once. That's the Madame Bonacieux, Bonacieux, who's married.
Yeah,
who's married, and that's kind of D'Artagnan's driving force throughout this book. Is she kind of comes and goes. She's kidnapped a lot. This is the most kidnapped woman in all of literature, and D'Artagnan is in a constant struggle, not just to win her affection, but just to rescue her from kidnapping.
Yeah, not too much success either. Let's talk a little bit. Let's pause, and I want to analyze another aspect of this book. Is people fell in love fucking instantly back then, because it happens probably 4 or 5 times in this book
at least,
and that's being that's being conservative. But like, yeah, so the first time this happens to D'Artagnan is with Madame, what was her first name? Anyway,
that's a good question.
It's in there somewhere. He falls in love with her, the kidnapped
Constance.
Constance, thank you. I'm just going to say Constance. He falls in love with Constance after having just met her, and D'Artagnan throughout the book, I think, falls in love with at least two people, and he's borderline on a third one, whose name is just Kitty for some reason. It's like the least French name, but it's literally Kitty, right? That one.
It is Kitty. Yep.
Yeah. So,
well, it's more the Kitty was really head over. So he's falling for Lady de Winter.
Yeah.
And Kitty is her servant. And Kitty falls head over. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And D'Artagnan, being kind of a dick, totally uses that to get closer to Lady de Winter.
Yeah. And so yeah, I guess he didn't fall in love with her. He did definitely. I'm assuming he slept with her, because there was that one time, like, he left De Winter's like apartment at like midnight one night and stayed in Kitty's room until like 5 a.m. And you don't really know what happened. He totally banged her. Now, again,
I'm in the same way. So I have thoughts right throughout the book. Can I tell you? So I'm not sure how much of this is French, how much of this is Dumas. But I probably have it highlighted somewhere. There's some brilliance in the writing here. And again, I'm going to have to attribute this. So this is probably just old French. There's a part, and I wound up looking this up because it struck me as weird, because I was having the same thing. I was like, did he just have sex with this woman? The reference of a woman defending herself. He said something like she defended herself vigorously. It is actually a euphemism for having sex. So I'm telling you, I read a whole little, whatever, like 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph article on this. Essentially, the man is attacking and the woman is defending, but not defending like, hey, get off of me.
More
Like the actual
participating?
act of being a woman and having sex would be the defense part of this.
So is it her virtue that she's defending? Like he's attacking her virtue?
No, no.
All right.
It's like it's a game.
That's all right.
So
Point
so
like
the act of sex would be attack and defense.
It sounds very aggressive.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting. Oh, here we go. Time passes quickly when it is passed in attacks and defenses.
Oh.
That is not like I'm coming on to you and you're like, oh no. That's literally like we're getting down.
So they attacked and defended for sure.
They did.
And then, but the nice thing about it is, like, even though he was using her, like, he at least treated her nicely when she was in trouble. Like, he took care of her. So he's not like a monster.
Yeah.
So.
No. I don't think, the kind of using her to get closer to De Winter is kind of a shitty thing. And here's a quote, which is, there is some really great, some of this writing, man. And again, I don't know to credit Dumas or the translator, so I'm going to credit Dumas, right?
Right.
D'Artagnan is explaining to Athos that he's trying to get to Lady de Winter through Kitty because he's trying to find Constance. So Athos says, yes, I understand now. To find one woman, you court another. It is the longest road, but certainly the most amusing.
That was a great line.
There are so many good lines and like observations about people as well in this book. It's staggering how many times I was really impressed with either wordplay or observations into like people's psyche.
Yeah, I'd say that the dialogue and interplay between characters is fantastic throughout, especially between the Musketeers characters. It gets a little bit different when you incorporate, the, I guess you could say, bad guys and stuff like that. But the way that they interact with each other, you could tell that, like, there was a real, like, comfort in the way that it was written. Like, it was a lot more easy and it felt realer, I think, maybe than other parts of the book. So I wonder what that's attributed to. But yeah, those characters' interactions were pretty much consistently fantastic.
Have we done enough on plot?
The real thing, it's a real good versus evil kind of story, I'd say. And obviously the Musketeers at their side representing the good, and Richelieu and all of his machinations being the bad. And while you could say that because there's an element of like war between France and England, that's the main plot, but really the main plot is like I'd say the Three Musketeers saving the day, the four Musketeers, like saving the day, saving the damsel, like that kind of thing. It reads more of a personal story for those four than an overall, like, they're embroiled in a greater plot. It's kind of how I feel about it.
One of the things that I found really interesting is that I think that the true antagonist in this is the Countess de Winter.
Yeah, totally.
Which is interesting because I don't know a lot about classic literature, but I wonder how many times before that were the protagonist four men and the villain is one woman.
Right.
You would think that of the times, even when he wrote this in the 1840s, right, that it would be that Richelieu would truly be the villain. And I think a lot of people would say that in generalizing the story, synopsizing the story.
Yeah, sure.
But she's really the bad actor in all of this. Like, Richelieu's doing his thing and he's a politician. Right, he's a cardinal, but essentially he's a politician, and he's kind of like pushing things in his favor and kind of manipulating things behind the scenes. But if you want to talk about somebody that's evil and wicked, it's this woman. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting for a book that's 260 years old.
And we're not worried about spoiling stuff, right?
No, not at all.
So I guess my main observation on Richelieu is that he is kind of built up in the beginning part of the book, I'd say the first like half of it, as being a formidable person, very powerful, and even in like the interactions you see between him and other characters besides the protagonists, like he seems like he's a very cutthroat, ruthless, powerful person. But in his interactions with other people, he seems a little insignificant. And I wonder if you felt the same way, but like, especially when he was interacting with, you know, our Musketeers, it felt like he was less, like grandiose than in the rest of the book.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going with. He's like a politician.
Yeah.
He makes decisions based on whatever's most prudent for. So again, we're not spoiling anything. Right at the end, he could totally have D'Artagnan arrested and probably executed. Totally and he chooses not to because D'Artagnan could be helpful to him down the road.
Yeah.
Like he makes his decisions based on what's in his best interest versus just being the big baddie, right? Like no matter what happens, he's going to do the thing you hate most. As a matter of fact, there are multiple times in this book where he does exactly what works out best for the protagonist.
Yeah, which makes him a terrible antagonist. But the thing about Lady De Winter the whole time is just how evil, like straight evil, she is. And like throughout the book, there's times where it's like people are warned about how she is, and then they're like, all right, I got it. And then she does the thing that they were warned about, you know? And so it's just like, it's so cool to see how her character, so Richelieu is like a manipulator, a master manipulator of people, but he has got nothing on what she can do to somebody. Because she just like, she's very shrewd in analyzing people and figuring out their weaknesses and what she could use against them and stuff. And it's just, it's cool to see her character, like just straight up evil as hell.
I want to talk a little bit more about the writing, and I have some quotes. So there's an interesting thing that's done in this book. This is all written omnipotent narrator through the whole book, but that narrator often breaks what we would call the fourth wall, right? Is that the fourth wall on TV? Yeah. Why is it the fourth wall?
Because if the camera is occupying one side of the view, so you're looking at, you can see the two side walls and the back wall.
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. I guess that makes sense. I was thinking top and bottom. I was like, no, that would be like the sixth wall. I don't know. At any rate,
you're thinking with too many dimensions.
Here's one. Yep. At one point, D'Artagnan promises to help somebody. It's the husband of the girl that he falls in love with. But the husband is arrested, and Dumas warns us, and he says, "Let our readers reassure themselves. If D'Artagnan forgets his host or appears to forget him under the pretense of not knowing where he has been carried, we will not forget him, and we know where he is. But for the moment, let us do as did the amorous Gascon. We will see after the worthy mercer later."
Yep.
It's like the fourth wall is broken to address us and be like, hey, we know. You're wondering what don't worry, we'll get to that. And he does it several times throughout the book, which is, I don't know. Again, is this a thing of the time that happened? It's not something we see very often in current fiction.
Yeah, and it's it kind of reminds me of like, if there was a narrator in like a cartoon fairy tale or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Kind of similar. And in the preface, I believe it's written in that language where the narrator is speaking directly to the reader. So it's established that way in the beginning, but as a preface as opposed to like the beginning of the story. So you get it right away, but like you didn't necessarily expect it to carry through into the actual like narrative the way it did. But I liked it. I think it was helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't help but smile every time it happened because it wasn't just delivered as a information to us. It was always done in kind of that tongue-in-cheek fashion. Like, don't worry, we haven't forgotten.
Almost to like instruct you how you're supposed to feel or add context to what was going on so that you could better understand. It was always a helpful breaking of the fourth wall.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some of this is so again, state it again. 250 years ago, someone wrote, "He gave a sigh for that unaccountable destiny which leads men to destroy each other for the interests of people who are strangers to them and who often do not even know that they exist." And that still goes on today.
Yeah.
And I don't know how astute an observation it was 260 years ago, but it was really striking to read it today and think that, hey, this has been going on probably forever. Like a reminder that, that the people in the military aren't serving their own purposes. They're serving the desires of others, and those others only know them as soldiers in a war, but don't individually know who's risking their lives to for whatever. I love this one. Everyone knows that drunkards and lovers have a protecting deity. I think that was about D'Artagnan kind of rushing off with reckless abandon. He had a lot of observations to make about women. And God damn it, I felt like so many of them were so spot on. And I'm not going to go through a lot of them just for the sake of not sounding terribly sexist. But I think this guy had his finger on the pulse, man. I do love this one. There's a great ploy that Porthos pulls. So Porthos needs to get money so he can buy his armament for the upcoming battle that he has to participate in. So he had been involved with a woman who was married, who was funneling him money. But when he needed money, she basically said, "Yeah, I don't see you very often, whatever." She just didn't respond to his letters. So he's trying to figure out how to loop her back in to get this money. So he goes to church where he knows that she'll be, and he makes sure that she sees him, engage long distance with a woman who is pretty and wealthy. Although the woman has no idea who he is, he just kind of makes it seem like they're sending signals to one another. So she approaches him afterwards because now she has become jealous. Although she did want to help him in his time of need and was pretty much done with him, the second that she saw that he might be involved with another woman, she kind of wants to regain her place in Porthos's life. And the whole thing is fairly brilliant, and it's complete throwaway. Nothing would be missing from this book if you didn't have this 5-page exchange. But there is this. Porthos had seen. Oh, so I'm sorry. She says, the woman, the one that got into the fancy carriage, as he's saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. Who was I flirting with or whatever?" And she points out that there was a carriage that she got into and says, "Porthos had seen neither the footman nor the carriage, but with the eye of a jealous woman, Mademoiselle Coquenard had seen everything." And I was really struck by how interesting that is, because I think but you know what I mean? And there's a lot of that in this book. And it always felt very genuine and very spot on.
So that's one of the more entertaining parts of the book, where they all have to find a way to pay for their armaments and stuff, and the whole interplay with that woman, the jealous woman, because the result of that interaction was that she invited him to dinner. And basically they plotted to make it seem as if he was her cousin so that he could come to dinner so that she could help him get money for his armaments and stuff. But she's got this 75-year-old husband, so that's why he had to pretend to be her cousin. And so he's like, all right, well, I in his mind, he's thinking, well, if this is what I have to go through to get the money, I'll suffer through it or whatever. And it's just so much worse than he anticipated it being. He goes there, and the 75-year-old husband is just this real curmudgeon, and they stay for dinner, and the dinner is just real awful, and everything just is just infinitely more tedious and awful than he expected it to be. But that's what he has to suffer through because he needs to get money. But then she wants to itemize, instead of just giving him money, she wants to buy a horse on the cheap and stuff like that, and it's just so.
He winds up with D'Artagnan's first horse, the one that everyone assumed was sick because of its color. Yeah. It's just fucking brilliant.
It is such excellent comedy because it's just watching this man suffer through this just terrible ordeal, because he doesn't want to find a more common way of like getting money to buy his armaments and stuff. Oh man, it's so good. That was so good.
And that's like I said, that's kind of the thing. As deep as this book is, and as convoluted in plot and complex and whatever, there are those moments that are like that you just can't look. Even if you're like, oh God, no more boring shit about, the Duke and his plan to do whatever. But you get to a moment like that, and it wipes away all of the other stuff that you didn't care about.
Yeah. The other example that I can think of where it's entertaining like that, kind of in the middle of nowhere, is it's after the main battle in La Rochelle, and they make, I don't remember exactly how this goes. There's this like this, what is it that they have to they go to have lunch in because they want to talk in secret?
Yeah, they
sort of like a little building or something.
Yeah, they make a bet and they go. I think it's the fort. I think they go to like the front into the fort that was being heavily contested, but right now nobody's fighting there.
Yeah, so like basically, they need to talk in secret, but like everywhere they go, they can't find like a place where they know that no one will hear them, and so one of them makes a bet with some of their, the other French, whatever. They weren't musketeers; they were other French army people or whatever, I believe, that they'll go to this little fort for an hour, and it's like this, it's an area of like an active conflict is going on in, but it's kind of like this neutral area, and so they make a bet that like they bet dinner or something, like nothing spectacular, but the whole idea is it was pretense for them to go into this place because no one else is there, and they can kind of plot what their next move is and share information that they learn together. So it was clever in the fact that like they manipulated people in order to like have a valid reason to go to this place to not be suspected of sharing secrets with each other. But then when they're there, it's total comedy because they're there and they're having lunch and talking and everything. But then like, enemies approach, and then they just very casually, like, fight them in a way where it seems like it's not really that big of a deal to them. They're very just super casual about it, and it's very entertaining the way it all goes down.
For sure. Which brings me to another thing we did not discuss at all: the lackeys.
Fucking lackeys, dude.
Holy shit, dude. I don't know if they've been incorporated into any of the film adaptations, but they're a pretty big part of this. So each one of them has a servant, like an indentured servant. They're referred to as lackeys. And they each have their own personality, like their own distinct personality. Mm-hmm. So the one that Athos has, right, is not allowed to speak, ever. They like Athos just gestures, like they have a kind of a complicated sign language that only the two of them understand because Athos doesn't want to hear him talk.
Yep.
And there's just great moments between the two of them. D'Artagnan has one who is far braver than he appears at first. Like they all have their own distinct personalities, and they're critical to the story because there are a lot of times where it's not that it's four of them. There are 8 of them. The lackeys will take up muskets and go ahead to clear the path or keep an eye on them from behind to dissuade anybody who approaches them. So I know one of the lackeys was very key to that little fight scene that you were just talking about when they're in that fort.
Oh, yeah, because he's reloading the weapons and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, so, I love the whole lackey thing because, like, it's just, and I think, again, there's like a social status thing going on there, like a caste system or whatever you want to call it, that like we as Americans in the 21st century don't understand as well, I guess, unless you studied it, which I did not.
Speak for yourself. I understand it just fine. I just don't know where to get one.
Oh, did you try lackeys.com?
God damn it, lackeys.com. Here we go. Lackeys.com. Lackeys.com, waiting for lackeys.com, waiting some more for lackeys.com. It is a web page is parked for free, courtesy of GoDaddy.com.
Oh, someone owns it. They're just not doing anything with it yet.
Yeah, I wish they'd start selling goddamn lackeys already.
Yeah. Oh shit! I lost my thought because that was so funny. I think that if you're of a certain status, like, you just hire lackeys, and like, so I would probably end up being a lackey. Like, if I like, let's be honest, I'm not walking around. I'm not a gentleman. I guess. Well, you called me a gentleman at the beginning, so yeah, that was your job. Like, lackey was a job, but it seemed like, again, pay is a really weird thing back then. You didn't just like agree on every week I'm going to get like X number, or like I'm going to get paid per hour I work. It's like they thrived or suffered like kind of at the level that their bosses did. Like, sometimes the lackeys just didn't eat, it seemed like.
Yeah. Aramis, who had studied religion, was going to be a priest, left whatever priest school or whatever he was in, and became a musketeer, but always wants to go back. And his lackey is like encouraging him to, because he doesn't really want to be lackey of a musketeer that could be shot or killed. He would be happy to enter into the church. Yeah, as some type of whatever church figure, a monk or something, and remain in service to Aramis. He just wants to do it in a much safer way. Yeah. Before we get to our wrap ups, I found one other. I have probably 40 things highlighted in this book, but just an example of just brilliance, right? As he said, he was ready to go to the end of the world to seek her, but the world, being round, has many ends, so that he did not know which way to turn.
Yeah, I remember that. I thought of you.
Fucking beautiful, man.
Yeah. Even back then, they knew the Earth was not flat.
Well, he says it's round. Circle's round. It could be flat. Just be a circle, right?
All right, you got me there. Quick thinker. All right. I realize now we've been talking about this for a long time. I think it might be time to wrap it up. You want to kick it off?
I would love to. I read this when I was in high school, and I remember having a really fond opinion of it. I think when I was in my 20s, I read The Count of Monte Cristo, which is the only other thing I read from Alexandre Dumas, and I absolutely loved it. And why I didn't go back and read more of his stuff when I had the freedom to read whatever I'd like is beyond me. And it was a sobering reminder reading this that on my long-term list is to read more of Dumas's stuff. The book is challenging. The book is long. It took me probably 70 or 80 pages just to get into the writing, where I was able to kind of speed up my reading, because I was stumbling a fair amount. That being said, there are so many goddamn gems in this. It's not a traditional story. I think in the way that we review stories, where there's, like a clearly defined 3-act structure or anything like that, it meanders, and as Rob said, oscillates is a great way to put it, between comedic and serious, and then it gets political, and then it's like deeply historical, but then it goes back to being funny, and then it goes back to being political. It's a little all over the place, but for me, it really, really worked in this book. The writing is absolutely fucking phenomenal. Just because I'm staring down at my Kindle here. People in general, he said, only ask advice not to follow it, or if they do follow it, it is for the sake of having someone to blame for having given it. I mean, there are some gems in this from 260 years ago that hold true today, and that really spoke to me throughout the course of the book. I would probably read Dumas' book if there was no action in it, and if it was just characters and like his insight into people. Being said, I really enjoyed the adventure stuff in there. Swashbuckling as a little kid. I wanted to be a swashbuckler when I grew up. I'm not sure that I'm not going to do it yet, but this book was just terrific all around. And I'm going to give it no less than 5 stars.
You keep saying it was published 250 years ago, but I'm pretty sure 1844 was like 175 years ago.
Hey, that's 175 years ago. Yeah, you're right. You are correct.
I can cut that out, or I can leave that in.
No. You are absolutely correct. I don't know why I was thinking it was. I was actually thinking 170 years ago, but that's only 170 years ago.
All right.
But it did take place. It did take place almost 400 years ago, right?
I'm not even going to... Yeah, almost 16... Yeah, almost 400, like 380?
Yep.
You were splitting the difference or something. I don't know.
It's a great goddamn book. It's all that matters. Not my math skills.
Oh, man. You needed a math lackey on that one.
I totally need a lackey. Can we get me... What do we have to do on Patreon for me to have a lackey?
Oh, is we need a lackey level now? Well, we had Ryan, the marketing intern, but he was not the best lackey.
I've got to be honest with you. Ryan didn't do much for me.
He didn't lackey it up too much.
No.
Should we hold lackey auditions?
If you're in the internet area and are looking to be a lackey for a podcast,
all right, I'm gonna wrap this up.
Like Jerry Springer. Yeah, you should probably do that.
Jerry Springer. Oh, all right. You can get Jerry Springer as a lackey. I've never read this before, and or anything by Dumas, as a matter of fact, and so I'm happy to go back to these classics. And there's a reason, obviously, that books like this endure. As Livia said, the writing is awesome. It's amazing, and the story is a little meandering, but I think that could be attributed to the fact that, like in the bio, it says many of his historical novels were originally published as serials, and I can absolutely see this as a serial. There's 67 chapters, and it is fucking very difficult to read quickly, as I could attest, because I started reading this. We're recording on a Tuesday. I started reading this on Sunday. And so basically every free moment between when I started reading and about 2 hours before we started recording, was me reading this book. But it being published as a serial could absolutely, explain why some chapters are very humorous, but then it would take a turn to be more serious, more political, all that kind of stuff. That being said, I wouldn't change it. I think the book is great, and I think it tells a great story. And it really illustrates, having read it now, how underserved any kind of modern depiction of the story I've ever seen, which boils down to probably the Disney movie and a couple other Hollywood offerings on the subject, really don't do justice. It really cherry picks some of the more clever parts and then just kind of makes up stuff in between. So I'm absolutely happy that I read this, and confident that I would enjoy other Dumas stuff as well. Whether we'll have the opportunity to is an entirely different subject, because hell, I don't know, books keep dropping all the time. I got a wall I'm building in my apartment, so who knows what will happen. But yeah, great book, and I'm with Livia's 5 stars.
Yeah, I don't foresee there being another Dumas book for the podcast, just for your sake.
Yeah, my breakneck
I started
pace.
reading the book. Yeah, I started reading the book over 2 weeks ago and finished it. I knew I had until today, so I did drag ass a little bit at the end. I finished it yesterday. Yeah, I don't know how to say this. In general, kind of opposed to reading classics. I'm like, it's dated, it's whatever. But the times that I've done it, even more recently, I've been very pleased. And that does speak to the fact that that's why they're a classic. We've reviewed a lot of books on this podcast that I've really liked a lot. But I guarantee you, in 200 years, nobody's fucking reading them. In 170 years, no one's reading them. Whatever, you know what I mean? In 50 years, no one's reading them.
Yeah.
So, I think in a personal goal, on a personal level, I am planning to add a little more classics to my off podcast reading.
All right, and just because you said we've read a lot of books, that just made me remember that we're coming up on a milestone in the podcast history. I know that we're over 400 episodes, but not all of those episodes are book reviews. And in recent years, it's been a little less. But anyway, what I'm getting to is we have, with this book, this is, I think, our 244th review.
Holy shit.
So we're a handful of books away from 250 book reviews.
We're going to have to pick a really interesting one for 250.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
I was like, the 250th episode, the 250th book review should be a special episode where we talk about all the books we've reviewed, but then there would never be a 250th book like on that episode.
Right. Yeah. That wouldn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. No, it wouldn't make any sense.
Although another thing that came up, someone way smarter than me said, and it's just, I kind of hate that I didn't think of this myself. This is episode 431. And someone who listens to he's probably listening to this, I have to give him credit, his name's Corky, told me you know what book you have to review for episode 451.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with Corky.
And my dumb ass was like, I was like, what book? It didn't even occur to me. And then finally I was like, oh my God.
Something wicked, this way comes.
So thanks, Corky, for that awesome idea. I think we should probably consider doing that.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. I read it again many years ago. I'm happy to read it again.
Yeah.
Hey, I was feeling, I guess, nostalgic, which isn't true because I had these tickets for a while, but probably right around the time we were talking about doing the Three Musketeers. So in this past week for me has been let's revisit the classics week. So I went to the Fathom movie event for The Wizard of Oz. Are you familiar?
With The Wizard of Oz? Yes, I am.
Yes. Okay. Well, I asked that because I mentioned it to a couple of my coworkers who are both under the age of 20, and neither one of them had seen it, which also leads me to understand what exactly is wrong with the world now. Like, I've got it all figured out. We keep talking about the different social aspects that are causing us to have a divided nation. It's because fucking everybody under like 25 has not seen The Wizard of Oz. That would solve at least 3/4 of our problems. So
it's like the oldest old man thing you've ever said.
Yeah, I know. The Wizard of Oz came out 180 years ago.
Wait, did your math lackey tell you this?
Wait. Yeah, 80 years ago. Yeah, 80 years ago. Yeah, it was the 80th anniversary. So there was a Fathom event, which was not a huge deal. I mean, there was nothing special about it. There were no like unreleased footage or anything. There was like an intro and a little outro by a guy from Turner Movie Classics, I think is who the guy was from. But I got to see The Wizard of Oz in the theater, which is something I didn't have the opportunity because 80 years ago, I was way too young to go to the movies. But, a couple of things struck me. And in stark parallel to reading Dumas is I had this sense when I was in the theater, because everybody from the cast of The Wizard of Oz is dead now. The last Munchkin died at the age of like 98 last year, 98 or 99. Yeah, so there's nobody who was involved with that movie in any way, shape, or form that is still alive. And I get that him, having died in 2018, understood how important this movie was to my generation, to other generations, I'm sure. But it's like the homage that you pay. I've seen The Wizard of Oz. It's one of my favorite movies. It's in my top 5 movies of all time. So I've seen it dozens of times. Okay. Going to see it in the theater was an interesting experience, I guess, because I wasn't looking at my phone. I wasn't distracted by the internet. I didn't get up to get a soda or a sandwich. Like, I just sat and watched the movie. And I think that sometimes it's important to revisit the stuff that like this Dumas book, right? When Dumas wrote this and serialized it, I don't think he was thinking that 170 years from now, 2 guys are going to read it and talk about it to an audience of people for an hour and a half. And it's just, I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. And I felt like we're doing the right thing by Dumas, much like I felt like going to see The Wizard of Oz in a movie theater. I was doing the right thing by the producers and directors and actors that were in that movie.
That's a tricky thing. And we've talked in the past about how everything's inspired by the thing that came before it. And I'm not making a direct connection between The Wizard of Oz and anything else, but like generationally, we're less likely to go back to dig deeper into those like classics and stuff. And I'm as much guilty about, as anybody else with that. There's so many things I haven't seen or read just because it's old,
oh, for sure.
But Wizard of Oz is one of those that, it was a favorite of my mom. And so we would watch it when I was a kid. and I appreciated it as a kid, and then as an adult, I'm much more likely to watch it for that reason. But as time, as more distance grows between that movie and when it was released and now, you're going to see diminishing returns on that, buddy. Like,
oh God, I know
it's going to be more spoken of. I've never watched Casablanca, but I hear people talk about how wonderful it was, but it's probably never going to happen. So
no, because that would interrupt like your 28th viewing of Scott Pilgrim. Like, you can't.
Come on, I got no time for this shit.
And Rob, 25 years from now, you're gonna be talking to some kid. You're gonna be like, Scott Pilgrim. He's gonna be like, who? You're gonna be like, the movie Scott Pilgrim. Yeah. He's gonna be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and it's gonna hurt, just like it hurt me to have someone tell me they've never seen The Wizard of Oz.
10 years from now, I'm gonna be like, what do you mean you haven't seen Back to the Future? Oh, wait.
It's funny because when I was 18 or so, I worked with a guy who was 27, I think at the time, 27, 28. He was Romanian. By saying that, he was born and raised in Romania, came here as a teenager. So I think he came to the U.S. when he was 15, 16 maybe. And we were talking one day, and I had said, because I'm not kidding, this has been one of my favorite movies since I was a little kid. And I said, whatever, you make the reference, right? The Yellow Brick Road or something you say in conversation. And I saw that there was no understanding on his face. So I said, come on, man, you've seen The Wizard of Oz, right? And he looked at me and he said, no, I don't know what that is. So I looked, I said, dude, how is it possible you've never seen The Wizard of Oz? And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, I like pornos. That was his response to that. He had never seen The Wizard of Oz was his attraction to pornography.
I got to give it to him. Like, you really can't fight back on that one.
He was one of the funniest people I'd ever worked with, too. So I gotta give him credit. I don't know how much of that was humor. That's the thing with him. You never knew if he was being serious or not. He'd say these things are outlandish, and you So
the Wizard of Oz thing makes me think of the Gregory Maguire books. Did you read any of those? Wicked or anything?
I read Wicked. I only read the first one.
Yeah. What was your take on Wicked?
I really liked Wicked. I like so obviously not canon, right? So before I get called out for respecting something that's not canon, I always think it's interesting to get that the look from the other side.
Yeah.
So I really like that. Elphaba was a great character, but I treat it differently. I don't treat it as part of the Wizard of Oz story.
More as a tribute.
Yeah. I mean, that book was really funny in parts and really dark. And if you could put aside what your feelings were about the Wizard of Oz and being tied to, because let's face it, we're tied to the movie, right? No one's tied to the book. The book wasn't very good. I read it probably 10 years ago. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
But I thought that was really good. I think one of the reasons I didn't move forward from that to read the other books was my affection was to those characters in the Wizard of Oz, and my understanding is the other ones, stray away from the story that we know. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It greatly embellishes on, I would say. Like, there's generations of characters and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Right. Yep.
I did read several. I don't remember. I don't think I read all of them, but I read Wicked, and then there was, I think, Son of a Witch, I think was one of them.
Yep.
And then there was like at least one or two others. I read 2 or 3 of them, and I thought that the writing was great, and I thought it was, like you said, a very interesting kind of what if on a venerated kind of storyline. So I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't know. I honestly didn't know which direction you were going to go on that. So yeah.
That guy is up until 4 years ago is still writing books.
Maguire.
Actually, I take that back. Up until last year, 2017 is his last book.
Dude.
He went on to do all kinds of other stuff. So in answer to your question, there were 4 Wicked books, but then he did Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, which was a Cinderella take, Mirror, Mirror, which was a Snow White take.
Oh, yeah.
After Alice, which I'm going to have to assume was an Alice in Wonderland. You know what I mean? So he kind of made his chops doing that kind of thing.
And then I have to imagine that the vastly successful theater theatrical Wicked, like the play, that had to just make tons of money.
It did, and I didn't go see that because here's what's fucked up. Right. I fucking love The Wizard of Oz. It's the goddamn musical. I love every one of those songs. I was reminded just how brilliant those songs were just the other night, just Sunday night. And I was like, sounds like there's a lot of fucking singing in Wicked. And I was just very, did the hand flip, like just very dismissive of, I'm totally not interested in any of that.
Yeah, there was. It was good though. I liked it.
Yeah, there have been a lot of spin-offs. I actually read a couple of short novellas just a couple of years ago, which was about another character that goes to Oz. I can't remember what they're called, but they were very popular. Mm-hmm. Todd McFarlane. Do you know who Todd McFarlane is?
The comic book artist?
Yes, yeah. He has a line of action figures, a pretty wide line. Yeah, McFarlane Toys. They did, if you ever look up it, they're called Twisted Oz or something like that. You should look up the action figures that he did. Like Dorothy's completely in bondage by like a munchkin, and like the lion is this ferocious. Look them up, man. They're if you look up McFarlane and Oz, I'm sure it's the first thing. They came out many years ago.
I'm looking forward to that being my Christmas gift exchange gift from you.
Oh my God. I'll be honest with you, probably picking one of those up, I'm sure, is ridiculously expensive at this point.
I got you.
Yeah, I mean, there were collectibles that were out maybe 15 years ago. So at this point, I would have to imagine that you're paying hundreds of bucks for one of them. So
should have got him for that Romanian friend of yours because he likes porn.
Yeah, no kidding. I like porno. His name is Mario. I doubt he's listening. He's back to living in Romania, last I heard. So
there you go.
But yeah, I mean, there have been different takes, and it's interesting to see when someone does. One of the other ones that and I can't remember his name. Fred Saberhagen. One of my favorite books of my youth was, I've always been a big fan of Dracula, the Bram Stoker Dracula, and whatever incarnations. He did a book called The Dracula Tapes, which was the story of Dracula told by Dracula. And it was essentially Wicked. In that, like, he's not that bad of a guy. Like when you hear his side of the story, it's very different than what Bram Stoker told you about this whole thing. So
that's great.
Those alternate takes are always kind of interesting. If done well, they're interesting.
Before we wrap things up, there is one thing I want to mention because it just recently happened, and that is the trailer for Donnybrook was released within the last few days of when we're recording this. And it looks fucking great. Like, we've had this thing in the past, like, we've known authors who have had, adaptations of their books where it didn't, like, necessarily hit, I think, the way that I would have liked it to. And so, like, there's that hesitation. So, like, I feel that Craig Clevenger's Dermaphoria is underserved in a lot of ways by the movie that was made of it. And I'll just use that as an example. But, like, there's this real hesitation I have every time someone's thing gets made into a movie because, like, what if they just don't do it right? And I'm not saying that the Desiree movie was just totally not good. I liked a lot of stuff about it, but I could have they could have done so much more with it. This Donnybrook trailer, dude, I was very nervous about how this would turn out because it's just not. It doesn't seem like an easy book to put on film, but man, that trailer was great.
You said it dropped recently. For some of us, it dropped like 4 hours ago when I remembered to watch it. It just like I was at work when I saw the stuff about it, and then I got busy. You know what I mean? So today, I saw somebody. I think it might have been Frank Bill posted something about it, so I watched it, and I was again. I really liked the book. Really like Frank Bill. Was excited about there being a movie, but my level of excitement has been dampened by being, like you said, not necessarily. Sometimes I mean I'll say disappointed, right? Because when you're super excited about something and it doesn't deliver 100%, right? No matter if it's 90%, you're still a little disappointed. But I watched that trailer and I am much more excited than I was pre-trailer.
Yeah, it looks like they did a. It looks like they did a good job. At the very least, they did a great job of making a trailer. So
trailer awards.
So
hey, let's not forget Bird Box, though. The most recent adaptation that we're intimately familiar with was really fucking good. So
Yeah, so I'm hoping that like this is an upswing, and when eventually trailer drops for Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, it follows in that path, because Donnybrook looks fucking great.
I agree, and this wasn't planning talking about this at all, but I mentioned Bird Box. Have you seen that somebody released the artwork for what the monsters were going to look like when they were considering putting the actual monsters in Bird Box? Yeah, we need to take a minute. Can you go ahead and pull up Bird Box monster or something? Yeah, there were a lot of articles about it.
Wait, does it look like a dude that is like having trouble on the toilet?
It looks like a baby that was punched in the face.
I think I got, yeah. That's... what, I mean, I'm glad that they never use that.
But see, this is the problem with movies, right? Like, you take a book where the key element of the book is that nobody can see the monster, so we can't see the monster, right? Yeah. And you take that, make it an integral part of the story, and you give it to fucking Hollywood. And Hollywood's like, nope, we need a monster. And we think that monster should look like a constipated baby.
That monster does look like a constipated baby.
Sandra said it was a green man with a horrific baby face. So they were green on top of that, because the ones I saw were just a black and white drawing.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, green man with a baby face.
That's fucking tragic. Like, I hate Hollywood so much, man.
Well, for somebody who spends all their time watching stuff they make.
Yeah. Oh, but I hate most of it.
That's why I watch a love-hate relationship.
That's why I watch the same stuff over and over again, is because I hate most of it.
And before we move on, if there's ever another season of The View, it's going to be the CW, The Lost Boys.
Is that a series?
They've ordered a pilot, so we'll see.
Oh, wow.
It's The Lost Boys, and it's on fucking CW. If you want to know what one night of the week we can't record, just figure out what night that's on.
All right. Well, I watched that. This will be the final I watched something recently thing. I want you to know I was so dedicated to getting done with this reading of this book that like 2 or 3 days ago, 8 new episodes of Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt were released, and I have not seen them yet.
So I guess we know what you're doing right after this podcast.
I'm watching Kimmy Schmidt. But I did watch recently, when it came out, or near when it came out, that 4-part Ted Bundy documentary series on Netflix.
Is that the one that's making all the news? Netflix is telling people to stop saying that he's hot because it's Zac Efron that's playing him?
No, that's a separate. So there's
okay, I got you.
There's a movie coming out with Zac Efron. This is a documentary made primarily from like interview recordings of Ted Bundy.
Okay.
Kind of laced in with like a historical counting of what's going on and stuff like that. And I was talking to someone at work about this, and the thing that I really appreciate about this Ted Bundy series, the 4 hours, is that it goes from kind of that like sensationalism of like he was a very charismatic, charming, attractive guy, blah blah blah, in the beginning, and the more you watch over these 4 hours, the more he becomes just like tedious and boring, and like the only reason he got away with it as much as he did was because there was no internet, because like information sharing between states and stuff was almost impossible. So like the moral of like this 4-hour story basically is like there was nothing special about this guy, and it's funny that this movie's coming out and the movie is emphasizing like his charisma and stuff like that, and it's causing people to like have a bad reaction because it's in poor taste. But that's, I mean, the mania of the time was like there were people that were like kind of hooked on how charming this dude was. So like it's accurate. Like people did feel that way. So. Yeah, and that sucks, right? So people are, because I guess I'm again kind of confusing the two, right? Because I've seen all this stuff about the Netflix one, and then I'm seeing Zac Efron's picture everywhere as Ted Bundy. So I'm assuming that Zac Efron is Ted Bundy in this thing.
that's where I'm at. Like, yeah, we don't want to make him into a hero. We don't want to make him into a likable guy. But if it's an accurate portrayal, then let it be what it is. Let people understand why he was able to have this influence. So one thing that happens a lot is we judge people based on their appearance, right? You do it. I do it. Whatever. Right? You see somebody walk into your place of business, or you're walking down the street and you go, "Oh, that's a shady looking motherfucker. I got to watch my wallet." Right? Or you see a woman that looks a certain way and you immediately have some kind of like idea about who she is. People took this guy. He's fairly decent looking guy who's really charismatic, and they let their guard down, right? And what happened ultimately is he killed a bunch of women, and this was his MO. He was the one, right? And he's the one who had his arm in a cast. Hey, lady, can you help me?
Yeah, he did that.
I hurt my arm, and then he'd like push him into a van.
Yep.
Yeah. I can tell you with some certainty that there are plenty of guys that you could pick out to put in that same situation, and women are not going near that van, even pre-Ted Bundy. So
sure.
I think it's important to portray him accurately, especially if it's going to serve as a historical recollection of what happened, but also as a warning of what could happen. So.
Yeah, and it's tricky because like his case when it was covered was probably one of the first like nationally covered serial killer kind of situations, like in the what would it be, the early 80s. Like there was like real heavy, like obviously Manson family and all that stuff, but like he was kind of the first celebrity killer aside from like a Manson kind of person who was not liked, but like fucking Bundy had groupies and stuff basically, which is kind of sick and everything. But yeah, they have to portray him in the way that he was. So it's interesting to see this, like all the hubbub. And it's a trailer for a movie. It's not the whole movie. So like I'd imagine that like, maybe he does turn out to be just this like hopeless scumbag. That's how they portray him at the end of the movie. Like,
why would we wait to see the evidence before we pass judgment?
Oh, God.
What are you fucking crazy? Outrage culture, my friend. Outrage culture. There are people who sit around and wait for things to be pissed off about.
Here we go. Hey, open that door.
Well, it's true, though. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. I've seen backlash because the next Ghostbusters movie isn't going to be about women.
But isn't being outraged by the outrage culture also kind of outrage culture?
Oh, I'm not outraged by it. I just kind of rolled my eyes at it. Is all I'm saying.
Oh,
but
okay.
I mean, I was just confused about the backlash. So I've never seen it, but I understand Ghostbusters is a well-loved movie, right? There was the Ghostbusters. There's the Ghostbusters movie that came out a couple of years ago. That was received okay. I don't think it was super well received by people. And now they want to, refire up the franchise. And immediately, before anybody's seen the movie, there's outrage. So, and I outrage because that's what I read in an article. I don't know. I don't spend any time on Twitter anymore, so I have no idea if there was Twitter outrage or not.
Jason Reitman's making that movie, and his dad Ivan Reitman made the original Ghostbusters.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So there you go. I'm excited about it.
I am probably not going to see that one either. So.
Yeah, we know. You're just going to watch fucking CW.
Now, if the CW does a Ghostbusters TV show.
Oh, all right. There you go. I got your word on that.
Yep.
That's probably not going to happen. Are we done? It's been a long episode.
We're so done. Oh my God. We're so done.
What's next?
Next week. So you get next week's episode a little late, as one of your hosts will not be in town. But Vultures. We missed Vultures when it came out last week because we were busy. One of us was busy in the middle of the book when Vultures came out. One of us started the book like 5 days after Vultures came out. So, we're going to finish off the Miriam Black series for good, for once and for all, next week on Unbooked.
You got started. What are you thinking so far?
So far, so good. I will say that I have to separate a little bit. So it's reading really quickly after the Three Musketeers. But then one of the other things that's happening, and I want you to picture this. Think about Miriam Black. Think about Miriam Black's thoughts on walking into a Walmart. This does not happen in the book, but just think about the kind of things that. Now, contrast that with you just finished The Three Musketeers and you're reading Miriam Black's inner dialogue about society.
So it's a little bit of a culture shock kind of thing.
It's a little bit jarring, and like I said, I have to separate myself a little bit because it's not doing the book any favors. You come off reading something super eloquent. You know what I mean? So right. I'm sure that I will be able to cleanse the palate, so to speak. But I'm about 20% in, and so far so good. I like the direction the story is going in.
Awesome. All right. Any last things, or should we fucking bury this thing?
Let's put it to bed. Thanks for listening. Patreon contributors. Sorry there wasn't a spoiler episode. This week. It was just go back, rewind 90 minutes, and you'll hear the spoiler talk for this week. But thank you for being a valued patron, as always. And until next time, I'm Livius Nedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. Keep reading.